Pokemon Winds and Waves have finally been announced and I already cannot wait to play them, you guys. You know, when I first watched the trailer, it didn't really hype me up, but now I've arrived to the point that I'm so tired about the Gen 9 era that I'm ready for the next chapter. Too bad we need to wait for almost a year, but whatever, guys. While we wait for that, let's talk about the past. Let's remember why we're so passionate about this franchise. And of course, we couldn't begin with nothing other than the originals. The Pokemon titles that are actually still unbeaten for the number of sales. And it's of course the originals, Red, Blue, and Green, which we don't see here. So I've actually played these games when I was young, but not when they came out. In fact, I was born in 1998 and these games came in the West around that time. So we're gonna talk about my first games later on, but I quickly picked these games up later on after my first Pokemon games. And to be honest, I think they're still very playable. You can tell why they were such a success back in the days. They're such a good base for what came afterwards, and you can just simply tell that it was something innovative for not only handheld games, but especially like video games in general. Like, you didn't have a monster collector such as that one back in the days. You know, the original 151 are still among some of the favorite Pokemon for many people. Most of the nostalgia that runs around the Pokemon franchise goes back to Kanto. The region per se, I don't think it's too traditional. It's not like you play Kanto and you feel like you're in Japan, but still, it became iconic. I'm sure that everybody can see, you know, a small image, like a cutout of a screenshot of any part of the map, and any Pokemon fan would, you know, point out where it is in Kanto. So many people complain about these games being very buggy and glitchy when they came out, and of course, if you learn about the glitches, you can like get Mew, you can do a bunch of stuff. But to be honest, I've played these games so many times, and during my regular runs, I have never encountered a bug unless I looked for it. And I would honestly leave them in C tier just because we need to compare them to other titles that came out afterwards, and of course, and thankfully, they have been beaten by other titles, and we have some good stuff we need to talk about. Oh, Pokemon Yellow. Actually, I've never been a huge fan of this title, mainly because I thought that by giving Pikachu, you were a little bit constricted in some game rules. You know, Red and Blue were amazing, and I think the impact came through the fact that you could build your own team. There wasn't like a specific team. If you wanted to build yourself a team of weak Pokemon, you could have done that without any issue. It was your problem, your choice. But here you start with Pikachu. The first gym is rock typing, and as a kid it was so tough going through that with Pikachu. Of course, by growing up that becomes very easy, but still I believe that this title doesn't bring many more features compared to the original ones, Red and Blue, but other third titles in the future are gonna do that much better. So that's why I'm actually gonna put this game in E tier. I've played it a couple of times, but I've never been such a huge fan. The only good thing that I would talk about here is the fact that it's nostalgia, you know? It's one of the first games, and it's based on the anime, which was going very well, and it was a good way to approach the franchise, and so they tried to replicate that in the game. But I think it was like a little bit of a cheap shot. Not a huge fan, again, don't hate me on this. But now we're gonna talk about some incredible stuff, and I think, you know, this is the perfection of the Game Boy era. And of course, we're talking about Pokemon Gold and Silver. Guys, these were actually the first games that I've ever played. I remember going to this beach house that my cousins and their parents rented every summer, and in just a random closet I found a copy of Pokemon Silver, and that was my first game ever, and it was so much fun for me, you know. I was very little, of course, and it was so tough for me. I remember not being able to go through the first cave after the first gym, so I didn't really experience the full game until later on. I actually have never, it's not the first game, Pokemon game that I've ever completed, so that's very interesting. But unlike Kanto, in Johto you can actually tell you're in Japan. You have the traditional houses, you have people dressing in a traditional way, you have an updated Pokédex of not only new Pokemon but also evolutions of the old ones. And as of today, guys, of course not involving the remakes, it's the only region where we have 2 regions to explore, and I think it's still mind-boggling how that has not been reproduced in one of the future titles, but this alone makes it, I think, incredible, much better than their prequel, and that is why I'm gonna put them in B tier. And let's end the Game Boy Color era with Pokemon Crystal. Crystal, guys, is where third titles start to make sense. It doesn't have many differences compared to Gold and Silver, but it has enough to make it interesting. It makes it replayable. I think the best part are the animations of the sprites. That was incredible at the time. So when I think about Crystal, I remember that it felt like a premium product back in the time. Like the cool kids had crystals and all the other kids had like Gold and Silver. Just because, it felt technically improved at the time. I'm actually gonna put this in A tier because, again, it's an improvement on Gold and Silver, which was an improvement on Red and Blue. Okay, guys, this is very important for me. We're gonna talk about Ruby and Sapphire. Sapphire is actually the very first game that I've ever played to the fullest, and I have this incredible memory about it. I played it the first time in French without knowing the language. Of course, I grew up in Italy, so I only spoke Italian. Yes, I did some English in school, but in elementary school, it's not like you can speak another language. So I remember that my dad picked up Pokemon Sapphire from one of his work trips, and I played throughout the entire game, loved it, beat all the gym leaders and the Pokemon League without understanding a single word. And I remember actually exchanging this game for another one from one of my classmates. So I don't have this game anymore. It was the first Pokemon game I've ever finished, but I don't have the cartridge anymore. But it's such a good memory, you guys. To be honest, the Hoenn region is still nowadays my favorite region. Again, it's not like you can tell is Japan, in my opinion, because you don't see lots of tradition and culture throughout that game, but it gives you the idea that it's a tropical region. It's the first region involving lots of, seawater. You have a volcano, you have all of these very interesting spots. The graphic, I feel like it was very much improved compared to the Gen 2 games. We had 2 legendaries that were incredible to me because they felt like deities, They were shaping the ground and the seas. It was these ancient beasts. You had secrets underwater. You could use dive to explore underwater caves. There was a weird strategic way to unlock the Regis. It was just an incredible adventure that I think still holds up. And we're actually gonna talk now about, so I'm gonna give Ruby and Sapphire a B, just because I think they are a solid ground for what I think is probably, I'm gonna spoil it to you guys, my favorite game, Pokemon Emerald. I think that Pokemon Emerald is my most played game in the series. I have played it countless of times by myself, with my friend. I've done Nuzlocke, shiny hunting, soul links on it. It never gets old and boring for me. The graphics are so nostalgic. I remember playing at the beach with my friends. There was a method where you could clone Pokemon, and there were these 2 brothers who knew about how the cloning worked. And of course, the majority of us didn't know. the internet was barely out there, so nobody of us, of course we were little kids, nobody of us used it, and it was like a mafia, you know, that if you brought enough candies to these guys, they would clone one of your Pokemon. It was so much fun, such good memories, you guys. And I think that the Rayquaza edition with, you know, the first ever cutscene in a Pokemon game is memorable to this day. It's not gonna surprise you, I'm gonna put this in S tier. The Hoenn region just brings back so many memories, and I think that is what the core of Pokemon games should look like. You should have a region that it feels like it can live by itself, and that is not random, but there are these ancient beasts and deities in the region that they are very hard to find, or that they are active in the region and bring their presence. But the thing I miss the most about current Pokemon games is, for example, the Regiquest. That is my favorite part of Pokemon Emerald. You're just exploring this random route, and then you use dive in this small ass spot, and then you find this underwater cave using dive, and there's some braille. What is this? And then you find out that if you look at the inside the box where the cartridge came from, there is actually a booklet that tells you how to read Braille, and it tells you that you need 2 specific Pokemon to unlock these 3 legendary Pokemon that then need to be catched after very tough fights. Guys, that was peak Pokemon for me. And of course, there are also other S Pokemon games that we're gonna talk about, but Pokemon Emerald, you know, nostalgia is also a big part of it, but Pokemon Emerald is still my favorite game so far. Here we go, the first remake of the first titles of Pokemon, and it's actually fun to talk about this because they are about to come out on the Switch, and I think that is simply outrageous. I understand that some people don't like to emulate games, but first of all, it's not illegal as long as you have the original cartridges. And if you don't have the original cartridges, nobody's gonna care about what you do. These games, they're easily playable on your phone in like 2 minutes. You can download them. They are as heavy as a video that you take on your phone. I've played them countless times, as much as Pokemon Emerald. They are incredible improvements compared to the original Red and Blue. I think they're just classics. Colors of the remakes brought everything back alive from the originals. You know, I feel like they still have some of the downsides of the original games. For example, they don't have like a legendary that is running the region, but you know, it's the remake of a classic that made history for gaming, and I think it's one of the best ways of appreciating Pokemon as a longtime fan. So I'm gonna put this actually in A tier. Okay, this is a good one as well. Okay, so I think that the Sinnoh region is my second favorite region of the entire franchise. This was the region I grew up with because I was in middle school, and you know, those are the years you feel like you're evolving like in Pokemon, and you're going from a little kid to a kid, you know. But for the first time, you were going through some incredible dungeons. The Mount Coronet is just amazing. The music is awesome. The winter routes to get all the way to the top of the region are harsh. They're full of Pokemon. Not only they're tough on the challenges of Pokemon battles that you need to face against trainers and wild Pokemon, but it's also tough to see what you're looking at, because it keeps snowing. Like the snow is getting almost to your chest, so it's hard even to navigate the area. I think that is one of the greatest parts in a Pokemon game. And this was the point when legendary Pokemon actually became an intrinsic part of the lore. These are the games where we have finally the god of Pokemon. That was an incredible revelation at the time. The designs are amazing. You know, they're very different than the past generations, but I think they're Most of them are very strong designs, very memorable. You have the swamp, you have very different locations, one compared to the other. Dialga and Palkia are such cool legendaries, you know, they're the gods of space and time. As a middle school student at that time, what was cooler than this? I'll tell you what was cooler, because I'm gonna leave this in B tier and we're actually gonna put Platinum straight into S tier, because this is an incredible third title. I think again it doesn't get better than this with third titles. Not only you have faster gameplay mechanics, you know, a downside of Pearl and Diamond was the fact that, you know, HPs were going down very slowly during battles. You don't have this in Platinum. In Platinum, you're also exploring a section, an entirely new section. Not only you have the post game, which expands a lot of the game with the Island Frontier, I think it's called, but you also have the Distortion World, which is arguably the best place in a Pokemon game so far. Like, it's so cool when you use waterfall going upside down. You have, you know, the three legendary Pokemon from the lakes guiding you through all the puzzles, and then you're facing literally Satan at the end of that area. It's such a cool third title. I think it's still the best way of playing the Gen 4 games, and that's why it deserves an S tier. You know what other deserves an S tier, and we are on a row here? Pokemon HeartGold and SoulSilver, guys. Arguably, I can see why so many people say that these are the best titles in the Pokemon franchise. They're definitely the best remakes. They are starting, you know, with a good base ground, which are Gold and Silver and Crystal, and they're just bringing everything to the max level. You know, updated Nintendo graphics. They looked super cool. The sprites it was super cool to see the original Pokemon with futuristic sprites. You had amazing cutscenes of the legendaries. You had the Pokewalker, which was an incredible feature. I think it's so cool when Pokemon used to give you physical objects and gadgets together with your games. Of course, everybody's favorite feature, following Pokemon, and even nowadays they are having troubles using that feature with more modern games, but I think they nailed it on the sprite games with this title. Just memorable titles, definitely the best way to play the Gen 2 games, and they're just amazing. Okay, now we're moving to a very controversial gen. We're talking about Gen 5 with Black and White. This was the time in my life when you didn't want to be a nerd anymore and you wanted to play cool games, and that's why you went to play Call of Duty. What an imbecile. Black and White are great games. What I love about these games is the fact that you are using only new Pokemon, and I think that is something very brave that the new Pokemon games should do. I think that nostalgia is good if used moderately. I thought the story was very interesting. I was a little bit too young to, you know, appreciate the story, I think. But now that I'm older, I recognize that it was very brave from the Pokemon Company to go after these themes. And definitely Anne is a great character. I'm not a huge fan of the legendaries of this title, but the Unova region is very cool. We have the very first actual metropolis. I love the desert afterwards. Overall, a cool region. The Pokemon sprites, not a huge fan. While I don't have any issues with the first 4 gens design-wise for Pokemon, I'm not a huge fan of Gen 5 designs, but I still recognize the importance of this game and how cool they are. So I'm gonna leave them in B tier. And of course, we are talking about Black and White 2, going straight to S tier. Guys, these were the games that made me fall in love with a gen that I didn't think deserved my love. They made the Unova region so much more easy to be appreciated. I think the story was more intense and dynamic. They nailed all the animations for the battles. I think that the moving sprites were actually very cool. If we had a game like this coming out nowadays, I would fall in love for it. I think, again, these are the best ways to appreciate black and white for sure, or Gen 5 I should say. You know, you have the sewers in the Metropolis. You have, I remember the boat fights. I thought it was just an amazing upgrade. And here we go, we're jumping to the 3DS, the 3D Pokemon era, guys. Okay, so you're gonna notice a pattern here. We're gonna be a little lower in scores. Even though that is the premise, I think Pokemon X and Y, I think I really appreciated them because the jump from 2D to 3D, I think I criticize it more now than I'm wiser compared to back in the days, because it still felt cool to see Pokemon in 3D for the first time. And the Kalos region really feels rich in culture. I love the fact that nobody talks about this, but I love the fact that the trainers, when challenged, had 2D sprites, and it felt very close to the anime compared to the 3D models that came out later for trainers. I think the story was very cool. I love the fact that you know, you go around the region in a circular pattern. I thought that was pretty refreshing compared to the zigzagging that we were used to follow in Pokemon games. The Pokédex that came out for X and Y, even though shorter in number, was very cool design wise. It felt like it went very close to the Gen 1 designs. They were very simple, they were bright in colors, they were just very cool all around. There are many places in that region that I still remember. The music was so cool to me. I really love the X and Y music. Unfortunately, these games are super easy. Mega Evolution is arguably the best mechanic that was ever announced with a new Pokemon gen, so that's a plus. I remember having fun shiny hunting on this game. I think I'm actually going against what I said in the beginning. I think I'm gonna give this I don't know, it doesn't deserve an A tier. I think I'm gonna leave it in B, which is still pretty good, I would say. Look at what it's next to. You know, Kalos is just magical for me. I wish, this is a spoiler for later, but I wish we had a better rendition of that region with ZA, and we did not. Everybody's gonna hate me for this, but I'm gonna put Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire in C. I know that many people love these games, but when they came out, they were such a letdown for me, because Pokemon Emerald was always my favorite game, and so I was very hyped for these games. And if it felt cool to see some of the places in the region in 3D, but I didn't like some changes. For example, I didn't like the fact that I don't remember the name in English of the town, but basically the town where you get your bicycle, it was completely changed to be a mall. And I remember while waiting for this game, I was so excited to see how they would have remade a town, but it was just a mall. They were very easy. You get Latios just thrown into your face, and you can use a legendary from like the 3rd gym. And I think that is one of the worst things that you can have in a Pokemon game, just free legendaries without, you know, what made Pokemon Emerald my favorite one was what I told you earlier, the fact that you could go look for legendaries in hidden places, and here this is not the case. You're just given Pokemon like that. I still believe that the remade music for Pokemon Alpha, Sapphire, and Omega Ruby is one of the best ones in the series. That is very cool, but you know, then they didn't have what made Emerald also very cool, which was a post-game. The Delta chapter is a pretty cool take, but it's not as good as the Pokemon Emerald post-game, and that's why I'm gonna leave it in C tier. Oh boy, Sun and Moon. I remember being so hyped about this game, but what a letdown, you guys. Really did not like it. I thought it was very slow, very guided. Not a huge fan of the designs of the Pokemon of this region. Z moves, really did not like them. I did not like the lack of gyms. Overall, I think they are pretty bad. I think they go together with... Don't hate me on this. I mean, you can hate me on this because it's, you know, it's just my opinion, but I don't think they hold up with the rest of the series. I think, again, there is high potentials for the Alola region, but I think that Winds and Waves is what Game Freaks wants to do to have a good take on a tropical island Pokemon region, because they know that it couldn't achieve their full potentials with Sun and Moon. I love the fact that the Ultra Beasts were announced. I didn't like the fact that they were in the same Pokédex as the original Pokemon, because they're not Pokemon, they're aliens. They are from another dimension. I think there should be an Ultra Beast Pokédex and they shouldn't be classified as legendary Pokemon, and I remember really not liking that. You know what's even worse, you guys? You know, this is the only Pokemon game I've never finished. I remember playing this with one of my best friends who loves Pokemon, and we both could not finish this game. You know, it starts with a bad basis, which is Sun and Moon, which, you know, the first time you play through a Pokemon game, you appreciate it no matter what, let's be honest. But Ultra Sun and Moon, I think, are the weakest second or third chapters for a Pokemon game. Improvements are not enough to make it greater, and you're gonna see it's the only third title that I'm not placing above an original title. And yeah, I don't have a lot to say. Just, to be honest, a letdown for me. Not enjoyed it. It's like the only Pokemon game I'm seeing here that I wouldn't appreciate playing, to be honest, again. So I'm just gonna leave it in F. I'm sorry for whoever likes it, but it's not for me. Let's Go and Eevee. This is very interesting. I think that this is the best game for young people who are, you know, are not very good at playing games, and for first-time Pokemon players. Even though the capture mechanic makes it terrible, in my opinion, I think it's a very good introduction to the Pokemon franchise in a very easy way, which is something that somebody who's new to the series probably needs, because they don't know. Think about it, guys. We know the typing because we have grown up with these games, but somebody who approaches Pokemon for the first time, they don't know what rock is strong against too. They need to learn all of that, and I think that it's very user-friendly. It's like the game I would let my girlfriend play for the first time if I wanted her to approach Pokemon. And guys, let's talk about the graphics. This could arguably be the best graphics we have in the franchise. They're just cartoony enough to be almost anime-like. They're perfect for Pokemon. They're spot on. I think this is what Pokemon games should look like. The way Pokemon follow you is the only other good time I can remember other than HeartGold and SoulSilver. They made it perfect. The proportions are good. The way they animate themselves are good. The way you can write them is very good. So I'm actually gonna put, it's gonna surprise most of you, I'm gonna put it in A tier, not because I consider it to be one of my personal favorites, but I think it's just a solid title that so many people can enjoy, and I love, you know, sharing my passion with somebody else. And if I were to share Pokemon with somebody who has never played it, I would probably go with Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Oh boy, how much hate you got, buddy. When I played Pokemon Sword and Shield for the first time for the Nintendo Switch, it was during COVID. I was alone, by myself, in my house, in a small-ass apartment in Milan, Italy, working for the first time remotely after a graduation that didn't feel graduation from college because we didn't do it in person. So it was a kind of, you know, depressing time. But this game, I appreciate it so much because it felt, you know, being in a new Pokemon region, it felt like Great Britain. It felt, the Pokédex I think was very cool. The animations were fluid, the games were without bugs. People like to complain about stuff like the textures from the trees. Seriously, guys, do you know where we are right now with the graphics? I think Sword and Shields have just a couple of negative points, which are the fact that they are probably too easy, and some animations in some contexts they are not incredible, and I feel like they're wild there. They are limited a little bit by the fact that you cannot catch Pokemon that are much higher in level compared to yours. Even though I understand why they did that, of course, they needed to balance the game because they don't want you to go with a level 40 Onix against the first gym. But, you know, it takes away a little bit the fact that it's an adventure that you need to live it to the fullest. But other than that, the first DLC, I think it sucks. The second DLC, I think it's pretty good. I really like the story. I thought it was interesting. The legendary Pokemon were interesting. In general, I think highly playable. I think highly replayable in general. I think it's the latest Pokemon game I've replayed. So yeah, definitely Sword and Shield, in my opinion, A tier. What's next? Oh boy. Oh. Wait, didn't Arceus came out earlier? Really? Scarlet and Violet are that old? Guys, this is the bottom of the bottom. I've never played a game that made me feel like the developers were kicking me in the nuts and making fun of me. They're just embarrassing all over the place. Let's leave the Pokemon designs on the side because, you know, that could always be good. There are some of my not favorite Pokemon, but some Pokemon that I really like a lot from this gen. I have studied game development in college, and I've produced multiple examples of gaming prototypes in 3D, and I would say that most of them looked better than this dog-ass crap that is Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. They're so buggy. The fact that you can see under the ground when you're fighting is mind-boggling for me. The FPSs are bad. And I'm talking about the original one. I haven't played the updated version on the Switch 2 because I don't have it, but you know, I gotta judge it for when it came out. Gameplay is sloppy. The game environment is just, you know, flat ground, and you have one mountain that is terrible to explore. I don't even want to talk about that. It's the first time that it was like, okay, maybe I'm too old for Pokemon, but that was not the problem. They're just bad games overall. I thought that Paradox Pokemon were a great idea on the paper. Literally, you have a piece of paper in the game that showcases better designs compared to what we have. I'm sorry about this, but I really did not appreciate these games, and it doesn't even feel like Spain. We were supposed to be in Spain, but what's Spanish about that region, to be honest? Nothing. I think they're just very bad. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, I think they were okay. What was the problem about them is that when we got the remake for Gen 3, we got a version of the older games with the graphics of X and Y, which was that gen's graphics. Instead, with the remakes for Gen 4, we got a chibi style, a top-down chibi style, and it basically was just a remaster of the old games. They were just one-to-one. They didn't have even the addition from Pokemon Platinum. They were, you know, it felt like when you had to do your homework or your research, and you do just what you need in order to get a passing grade. It doesn't feel like they put effort into it. I know like another company did it, but who cares? It's just a mainline, and we need to focus on that. So I think these are gonna go into D tier. I mean, it's Gen 4, it's still pretty good. The story is that one, but following Pokemon was very bad. It was just a letdown, not the Gen 4 titles that we were supposed to get. Finally, we're talking about this. I thought that Pokemon Legends Arceus was supposed to represent what the future was gonna be like for Pokemon. It felt like for the first time that you were going on an real adventure in the wild. It was dangerous. Pokemon could hurt you. You had to survive somehow. You had to explore. Yes, of course, the environment wasn't very detailed. It was a little, the graphics weren't very good, but the gameplay, the essence felt nice. Another part that I think was great was the fact that you had a small town and you had to build it and you had to improve it. And how do you do that? You capture Pokemon and you actually gift them to the inhabitants of the town. It's not like they're borrowing them for you. No, you're giving away your Pokemon to other people, and that feels like you're doing actually something for the place where you live. You're being part of the community. I remember, giving, I think it was you were giving Geodude to the guy, the agriculture guy, to the farmer, and afterwards you can see plants growing. I thought it was just great. The way you capture Pokemon felt very good. You were just exploring a desolate land full of Pokemon that wanted to hurt you. The lore is pretty good, even though it's nothing mind-boggling, but I think that it was a very courageous, it was supposed to, in my opinion, a very courageous starting point from which Pokemon should have gone. And I think it was very appreciated by the community because of that. But then they decided to throw everything away with Pokemon ZA. What is Pokemon Legends? What is the Pokemon Legends series supposed to be about? I thought it was supposed to be about legends, stories about deities, about how Pokemon came to be, about how regions came to be. Instead, we are talking about a modern city here. We're talking about a modern threat. It doesn't. If you wanted to make a Pokemon Legends game about X and Y, you were supposed to do it about how AZ created the machine to destroy the world, how the Pokemon Wars happened. You had time to go through the war between what was supposed to be Galar and Kalos. So you had so many options to go in the past and actually tell a legend, but you decided to tell about a modern event that doesn't even feel like an incredible threat, because you're just battling people in a town, catching Pokemon in these areas in a town. And then at the end of the day, yes, you're saving the town, but there's nothing legendary about it. The level design of the city is trash, and I'm sorry we're ending on such a negative note, but I definitely think this goes into E tier. But that is it, you guys. Let me know what you think. If you want to scream at me in the comments, do that. If you don't agree, let me know why. If you agree, comment and leave a like. Thanks a lot, you guys, and I'm very hyped up about Pokemon Winds and Wave. We're definitely gonna talk about more about it during the next weeks. But thank you for sticking until the end.